In 1858, during a presentation to their fellow scientists, Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace offered a publication that would set the European intellectual community on its ear. Darwin and Wallace proposed the hypothesis that all organisms are the descendants of earlier forms, which have evolved over time through a process called natural selection. This became the basis for what we know today as Darwin's theory of evolution.
Darwin was not the person who really brought the notion of evolution to the fore. That went all the way back to the Greeks. His contribution was to suggest a mechanism by which it could come about, a mechanism that made sense and could be tested.
Using the mechanism of natural selection and his keen observations of the living world, Darwin amassed a compelling body of evidence for evolution. Even today, his pioneering efforts offer us a means of explaining the extraordinary diversity of life on Earth. In December of 1831, Her Majesty's ship Beagle embarked on a voyage to map the coast of South America and the Pacific Islands. On board, a 22-year-old naturalist named Charles Darwin anxiously prepared to observe and catalog the different organisms he would encounter. The Beagle provided few pleasantries, especially for a young Englishman prone to seasickness. So upon his arrival in South America, Darwin happily spent weeks in the field, noting the rich variety of traits among organisms.
He noticed as he went overland that what seemed to be the same species varied as the distance increased. And you might get to the end of the distribution of the species, and the individuals there look very different from the ones up at the other end of the distribution.
Even among members of the same species, Darwin observed surprising variations in size, color, and other traits, variations that seem to increase with distance. Venturing south into Patagonia, he gained further insights by uncovering the fossil remains of an extinct organism.
He was collecting fossils, and he found that there were some fossils of an armadillo-like animal. So he wondered about this peculiar situation. The armadillo was, the living ones were unique to the New World. Wasn't it interesting that the fossils were right there under the place where these little things were scampering around?
Because he found them in the same area, Darwin guessed the living species might be related to the extinct one, modified over eons of time. This was a revolutionary thought in an era when most scientists believed species were distinct and unchangeable. But as the Beagle rounded Cape Horn, Darwin's most important observations lay ahead of him, in the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador.
In the Galapagos, every island had its distinct form of tortoise. The differences were slight. They're obviously all one species. And Darwin also noticed this in the birds, the so-called, what they're called now, Darwin finches. They're sparrow-like actually birds that varied enormously. Some had long bills and they would get insects from under the bark. Others had very heavy bills, like a finch, and they were for breaking seeds and things of that sort. You got all of these variations.
In the Galapagos, Darwin lit upon a key idea that certain traits among organisms might have something to do with where they live and what they eat. In 1836, 5 years after he first set sail, Darwin returned to England with many questions about how species originate and survive. Ironically, he found some help in the work of an economist, Thomas Malthus, who had written on the survival and growth of the human species.
There must be enough resources, obviously, for the individuals to survive. Now, population growth is such that in a relatively few number of years, any species, if all of its offspring survived, would carpet the earth. That does not happen. What does happen is that most of them die.
In a world of limited resources, organisms must compete in order to survive. In this simple idea, Darwin found the missing piece in his evolving theory. The variation of traits in different organisms must affect their ability to survive in their environment. This formed the basis for evolution through natural selection.
Well, Darwin's theory of natural selection, which was his unique contribution, is made up of these major components. First of all, in all species, all populations, there is variation that is inherited. You must emphasize inherited.
Darwin had long observed that many traits can be passed on from parents to offspring. He now proposed that conditions in the environment favor certain traits over others, allowing individuals with those traits to survive and reproduce.
Darwin made the point that there is a difference between those that live and those that die. There is a selection. Nature is making a choice. It is selecting those that are best adapted to live, but more importantly, being able to leave offspring.
So, members of a species who carry the traits best suited to their environment, perhaps a large beak to crack seeds or a well-camouflaged body, will survive to pass these traits on to their offspring. As changes in the environment affect organisms over vast stretches of time, species evolve. In 1859, under pressure from friends and a young colleague named Alfred Wallace, Darwin finally compiled these ideas in his legendary publication. On the Origin of Species rocked the scientific community and the public at large. Its theories remained controversial and not fully understood until advances in genetics during the early 20th century revealed the secrets of inheritance. Even then, scientists could not agree on the specifics of Darwin's theory until the 1940s, when Dr. Ernst Mayr forged the modern synthesis of evolution.
Prior to about 1937, the two fields of evolutionary biology worked quite independently of each other, neither fully understanding what the other field was doing, and both fields being quite sure that what the others were doing was probably mostly wrong. And this was all eliminated, and a single evolutionary theory was combined together, and that was the evolutionary synthesis.
Over a half-century has passed since Dr. Mayr wrote his book. In that time, scientists have uncovered a wealth of evidence that supports Darwin's theory.
Because it is basically so incredibly simple. It is so logical. It simply says, if you have a variable population, only certain ones will survive, because in all species, even slow breeding species, there are always far more offspring produced than can possibly survive.
With their awesome capacity for reproduction, living organisms ensure genetic variation. Over time, some of these genes are selected and others discarded in response to the many pressures of the environment. While most of these pressures are part of nature's design, others appear only when humans intervene. A late afternoon at the coastal marsh may seem tranquil to some, but Dr. Richard Mayr sees a field of battle. He's a frontline soldier in a biological war, the fight against disease-carrying organisms called vectors.
Vectors are animals or organisms that carry diseases to another organism. They act as a method of transfer of a disease agent from one organism to another. When we look at vectors worldwide, mosquitoes have to be considered perhaps the most dangerous for the fact that on an annual basis, nearly 2 million people, mostly children, in Asia and Africa, die from malaria transmitted by the Anopheline mosquito.
Once easily controlled through the use of pesticides, the pesky mosquito and many other disease vectors have developed a resistance to these chemical weapons. This is the primary concern of vector control scientist Dr. James Webb.
History has shown that almost all chemicals that have been used on target populations have developed resistant forms in those populations to that chemical. It may just take a matter of a number of years. I mean, it can be very quick.
Insecticide resistance offers one of the most striking examples of evolution in action. Resistant populations can survive doses of pesticide that would have devastated previous generations. Dr. George Georgiou, one of the world's foremost experts on the subject, hopes to uncover the exact cause of this evolutionary change.
The resistance is based on genes which provide the insect with the ability to survive in the presence of the insecticide.
Dr. Georgiou has discovered that one of these resistant genes produces a special enzyme which deactivates certain pesticides. By measuring changes in the frequency of such genes over time, scientists can track the evolution of mosquito populations. The sum total of all genes in a given population is called its gene pool. Genes often exist in different alleles, which are responsible for the different expressions of a given trait, such as eye color. The proportion of the total gene pool represented by any single allele is called the allele frequency, or simply the gene frequency. Without any evolutionary forces at work, gene frequencies remain constant, maintaining a genetic equilibrium.
In the absence of any disturbing forces, we expect gene frequencies to remain constant in time, no evolution.
Yet, in his study of mosquito populations, Dr. Taylor has documented that gene frequencies are changing, sometimes within 8 to 12 generations. Different forces can cause this type of evolutionary change, including mutation, natural selection, gene flow, and genetic drift. In the case of mosquitoes, scientists believe a mutation introduced the resistant gene into the population, which was then amplified through natural selection.
With insecticide resistance, we're finding selection absolutely unparalleled in the natural world. As a result, we're seeing much bigger changes in gene frequency and much bigger changes in genome reorganization.
While mutation may introduce a resistant gene, another force must be active to ensure a change in gene frequency. In the Battle of the Marsh, the pesticide itself acts as an agent of selection, favoring the survival and reproduction of resistant mosquitoes.
During natural selection, certain environmental conditions act as selection pressures, which favor certain traits over others. In the absence of insecticides, the non-resistant mosquitoes, called susceptibles, dominate the population. But a small percentage of the group carries the mutant genes which make them resistant. Exposed to insecticide, most of these susceptible mosquitoes die without reproducing. But the resistant individuals survive to pass on their genes. After generations of exposure, the allele frequency changes dramatically, with the resistant mosquitoes now dominating the population. Because the allele frequency here changes in a specific direction, scientists call this directional selection.
In addition to mutation and natural selection, evolution can be influenced by the migration of organisms. This process is called gene flow. For example, the immigration of susceptible non-resistant mosquitoes can slow down a population's evolution.
If there is an inflow of susceptibles, then there is some delay in the evolution of resistance. Eventually, resistance will evolve at a slower rate than if the entire population is treated.
As mosquito populations continue to evolve, vector control experts must carefully screen for evidence of resistant genes.
We're able to take either larval mosquitoes right out of the aquatic habitat or flying adult mosquitoes and squash them on the filter paper. And then we're able to compare it with what we know as are susceptible or do not have the esterase enzymes, and we make the comparison between these squashes, these blotches, and we can tell whether or not they have the enzyme or not.
While the incidence of mosquito-borne disease remains small in North America, the growth of pesticide resistance leaves vector control scientists with many concerns.
Perhaps the most primary is the spread of our populations into previously rural areas unoccupied by humans, where they are now encountering vectors.
The appearance of pesticide-resistant mosquitoes reveals how human intervention can drive the process of natural selection. For this reason, scientists like Dr. Mayer continue to wage their war against these evolutionary changes. Like Darwin and the Galapagos, we find some of the most dramatic examples of evolution in remote locations, such as the Channel Islands off the west coast of the United States. Here, biologists like Misty Gay are working to protect the unique species endemic to these island habitats.
An endemic is a species that's found exclusively in a certain area. For example, if I say a Catalina live forever is a Santa Catalina Island endemic, I mean it's found only here and nowhere else in the world. We also have at least 30 species of California island endemic plants that are found either here or on one of the other California islands.
The most interesting endemics are those that are only occurring in a very small geographical area, for instance on a small island or in a small area on the mainland. On Catalina we have endemic plants such as Catalina ironwood and Catalina mahogany, endemic animals such as the Catalina island fox, and all these are very interesting organisms.
Groups of the same type of organism are often referred to as a species, but scientists use a more precise definition.
Species are aggregates or assemblages of interbreeding populations that are reproductively isolated or genetically isolated from other such assemblages of populations. Now that is the biological species definition, which is based on the ability to reproduce together or to be reproductively isolated.
So, a species is a group of organisms that can breed only with each other. When groups of the same species become isolated and do not interbreed, they begin to diverge in a process called speciation.
Normal speciation is when two populations are geographically isolated, do not exchange any genes, develop independently, and develop until finally they are so different that when these two populations expand and come together again and overlap, they no longer can interbreed.
Speciation often relies on the geographic isolation of organisms, such as those you'd find in neighboring mountains, separated by lowlands or deserts, or on islands separated by vast stretches of ocean. Most of Catalina's plants and animals originated on the mainland, then, by air or sea, came to an island with a very different environment.
When you have island populations separate from mainland populations, the island habitats may be different than those in the mainland. That would encourage evolutionary differentiation because you have different selection pressures as a result of those environmental differences. Island populations tend to be smaller often than their mainland counterparts, and this also encourages evolutionary divergence as well.
The absence of selection pressures seen on the mainland have shaped Catalina's wildlife into different forms.
I think on islands, the selection pressures that are most evident are things such as a lack of large predators, such as mountain lions.
Scientists believe the lack of predators may explain differences in color and the larger size of many animals and plants on the island.
There's less predation, less competition on the island than there is on the mainland. So the species don't have that selection pressure to be lighter and smaller, therefore less conspicuous to a predator.
Through most of its known history, Catalina never supported large grazing animals. Ironically, humans have introduced livestock which have placed negative selection pressures on the island's endemic plants.
We have an interesting situation on Santa Catalina Island where large herbivores have been introduced into our fragile ecosystem. Goats, pigs, cats, at one time cattle and sheep. So we have a long history of overgrazing, and we're now seeing a selection pressure where some of the non-native plants have a genetic advantage over our rare native and endemic plants.
In addition to unique selection pressures, scientists have noted another factor at work in isolated populations, a force called genetic drift. In one example, known as the founder effect, a chance event, such as an ocean squall, suddenly moves a segment of a population from one environment into another.
The founder effect occurs when small group, a part of a larger population, colonizes a new area. The consequences of the founder effect are that the new population, the colonists' population, is genetically different from the original parent population. As a result of that, this sets the stage for further evolutionary divergence between the new and the old populations.
To ensure speciation, the genetic changes produced by natural selection and genetic drift must be preserved by reproductive barriers which prevent gene flow between the diverging species.
Now, species have adaptations, or the members of species have adaptations that prevent them from mating with the wrong kind of individuals. In other words, with individuals of different species. These properties are called isolating mechanisms.
Isolating mechanisms are often revealed in animal behavior. For example, the mating of many seabirds begins with a unique dance of courtship, recognized only by a member of the same species. Temporal or time-based isolation offers another reproductive barrier. For example, in lower latitudes, these purple sea urchins spawn in early spring, while their nearby cousins, the red sea urchins, reproduce in early winter. This isolation in time prevents the two from interbreeding and protects the integrity of each species. But on Catalina, many endemic plants and animals have not yet evolved strong reproductive barriers, making them vulnerable to unwanted interbreeding.
For instance, one of the problems we have on Catalina is that the Catalina mahogany, a rare endemic, hybridizes with another species of mahogany on the island. and that's a threat to the Catalina mahogany.
To protect these unique species, naturalists like Misty Gay are constantly monitoring this environment and removing outside influences.
I'm really proud of how much we've accomplished, the reduction of the feral animals and the reduction of some of the alien plants, but we have a long ways to go.
Biologists view evolution as the study of genetic change over time. In some cases, only a few generations are required to evolve a new form of life. In most cases, we must look into the far distant past to find evidence of evolutionary change. Through this continuing process, populations ensure their survival and generate the astounding diversity of life.